My voice vanished the day the divorce papers arrived. Not from shouting, but from a silence so deep it felt like drowning. My husband left me for my sister. My parents said to keep quiet for the family's sake. I became a ghost in my own life, moving through my days in a numb haze, working a job I hated, speaking only in monosyllables. For 2 years, I was a museum of my own grief. Then, a stray dog with a wounded leg limped into my backyard. He was silent, too. And in trying to fix him, I began the violent, beautiful work of fixing myself. Hello. Welcome to Hurt Stories. My name is Cora, and for 2 years of my life, I was a living ghost. The haunting wasn't something that happened to me. I was the specter. I drifted through rooms, through conversations, through what was left of my life, leaving no impression, making no sound. The betrayal that created me was not a single explosion, but a meticulous, surgical dismantling. My husband, David, and my younger sister, Elise. The words still feel like swallowing glass. They didn't have a dramatic affair. It was worse. It was a quiet, mutual realization. They later told me that they had been each other's soulmates all along. They presented it to me not as a confession, but as a revelation. As if they were doing me the courtesy of informing me I had been living in a misunderstanding for 8 years. The divorce papers were a formality. The real divorce happened in my parents' living room. My mother, wringing her hands, said, "Cora, please, try to understand. These things happen, we don't want a scandal." My father, avoiding my shattered gaze, muttered about keeping the family together. Their message was clear. My pain was an inconvenience. My rage would be an embarrassment. The path of least resistance, the path that preserved holiday dinners and their social standing, was my silence. So I swallowed every scream. I packed every furious, grieving word into a lead box and sank it somewhere deep inside. My voice didn't break. It retreated. It went underground. I moved into a small, beige rental house at the edge of town. I worked as a data processor in a windowless office, a job that required no human connection, just the mindless transcription of numbers from one column to another. I would come home, sit in a chair, and stare at the wall until it grew dark. I stopped calling friends. They didn't know what to say, and I had nothing to tell them. "I am fine" were the only words I could consistently force out, and they were such a profound lie that they poisoned the air around me. I was a sculpture made of ash, holding its shape through sheer, brittle will. My body held the memory my mind tried to suppress. I developed a chronic ache in my jaw from clenching it shut. I had insomnia, but not a racing mind insomnia, a hollow, empty insomnia where I floated in a void of nothingness. I was not sad. Sadness has texture. I was erased. The betrayal had not just taken my husband and my sister, it had taken my narrative. The story of my life, the loyal daughter, the devoted wife, the caring sister, was revealed to be a fiction. And with no story to tell, I had nothing to say. The first crack in the silence did not come from me. It came from a whimper. It was a rainy Thursday evening in late October. I was sitting in my dark kitchen, not eating, just existing, when I heard a soft, desperate scratching at the back door. I ignored it. The scratching turned to a thump, then a low, pained whine. Something in that sound, its pure animal vulnerability, pierced the fog. I turned on the porch light. Huddled in the corner, soaked and shivering, was a dog. He was a mess of matted, sandy fur, one back leg held awkwardly off the ground. But it was his eyes that undid me. They weren't pleading. They were resigned. He looked at me not with hope, but with a silent, weary acknowledgement of shared suffering. He expected nothing. A kindred spirit. I didn't think. I opened the door. He didn't rush in. He dragged himself painfully over the threshold and collapsed on the linoleum, leaving a trail of mud and rainwater. He laid his head on his paws and sighed, a deep, shuddering exhalation that seemed to come from the center of the earth. I stood over him, this broken creature in my broken house, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt a clear, unequivocal directive: help him. The silence was now a space we shared, but it was no longer passive. It was a workshop, I got an old towel and began to gently dry his fur. He flinched but didn't growl. I saw the wound on his leg, a deep, infected gash. I called the emergency vet. My voice was rusty, unpracticed. "I have a dog. He's hurt. Can I bring him in?" Saying those few words felt like lifting a car. At the vet, I had to speak. I had to answer questions. "Is he yours?" "I don't know." "What's his name?" "I don't know." I had to make decisions. "Yes, do the surgery." "Yes, prescribe the antibiotics." I used my credit card, maxing it out without a second thought. The financial consequence felt real and immediate, a stark contrast to the vague, emotional debt I'd been carrying. I brought him home, his leg shaved and stitched, a plastic cone around his neck. I made a bed for him from old blankets. I bought dog food. I set an alarm for his medication. The silent, numb routine of my life was violently disrupted by a new, demanding schedule of care. He could not feed himself. He could not change his own bandages. He needed me. And in that need, I found a tiny, flickering pilot light of purpose. I named him Atlas, because he carried a world of hurt on his shoulders, and so did I. Caring for Atlas was a physical conversation. I learned to read the subtle shifts in his breathing, the flick of an ear, the way he would lean his head against my hand when the pain was bad. I spoke to him in a low, steady murmur, not with words of comfort, but with practicalities. "Time for your pill, buddy. Let's check that leg. You need to drink some water." My voice, used only for transactions and lies, was being retrained for gentleness, for directive care. As his body began to heal, something in mine began to wake up. The ache in my jaw lessened. I slept, deeply and dreamlessly, on the floor next to his bed during his first difficult nights. I was so tired from the physical labor of care that my body simply gave up its vigil and surrendered to rest. The first time he wagged his tail, a slow, tentative thump against the floorboards when I came home with his special prescription food, I cried. Not the silent, internal weeping I was used to, but huge, heaving sobs that tore from a place I thought had been scoured clean. I sank to the floor and wept into his fur, and he sat patiently, bearing witness. It was the release of the first pressure valve on that lead box inside me. Atlas needed to walk, so I walked. First, just to the end of the driveway and back, supporting his weight, then around the block. Our world expanded at the speed of his healing. On these walks, I began to notice things again. The sharp, clean smell of cold air. The way the frost painted the edges of leaves. I had to be present to watch for ice he might slip on, to gauge his energy. My hypervigilance, once turned inward on my own misery, was now focused outward, on protecting him. His rehabilitation required a specialist. That required more money. My data processor's salary wouldn't cover it. The old me would have given up. The new me, the one who had a creature depending on her, looked at my skill set. I was good with numbers. I was meticulous. I put up an online profile offering freelance bookkeeping for small businesses. My first client was the vet technician who had helped Atlas. Word spread. Slowly, I began to work from home, building a tiny business. Every invoice I sent was a message to myself. I am capable. I can build something. One day, about 6 months after Atlas arrived, I was at the dog park. He was trotting, still stiff but joyful, after a tennis ball. A woman smiled at me. "He's come so far. You've done an amazing job with him." I opened my mouth to give my standard, mumbled thanks, but instead I heard myself say, "Thank you. It's been a journey. He found me when we were both a little lost." The sentence hung in the air between us, true and complete. I had just narrated a fragment of my story. And the world didn't end. That was the turning point. If I could speak my truth about him, could I speak it about myself? I didn't call my parents and rage. I didn't confront David and Elise. The silence towards them remained, but it was no longer a silence of submission. It was a silence of severance. It was the quiet of a door firmly closed. The energy I had spent on holding that pain inside was now being used to build a life around it. I started writing. Not a journal, but letters I would never send. I wrote to David. I wrote to Elise. I wrote to my parents. I poured every poisoned, furious, grieving word onto the page. I called them cowards. I called them traitors. I named the loneliness they had condemned me to. And with each letter, the lead box inside grew lighter. The words on the page were my voice, finding its strength in a safe, private arena. Atlas and I developed a language. He would nose my hand when I was staring into space too long, lost in a memory. I would talk to him about my work frustrations, my small victories. That client paid, Atlas. We can get you the better joint supplements. His listening was absolute, non-judgmental. The final step in my unsilencing was about community. I started a small, informal group at the local animal shelter for people who had adopted special needs pets. I didn't position myself as a leader, just as someone who had been through it. The first time I stood in front of those 5 people, my heart hammered. I looked down at Atlas, sitting calmly by my feet, his steady gaze saying, "You are safe. You are here." I began. My dog Atlas had a severe leg injury. I was going through a hard time myself when he found me. I didn't know how to help him, but I learned. And I shared. I shared the practical tips, but I also hesitantly shared how healing him had forced me to start healing myself. The women in the group nodded. They understood. They had their own stories. For the first time since my old life exploded, I was connecting, not as a victim, but as a person with something to offer. I was broken, betrayed, and silent, until I was needed, until a creature with eyes as lost as mine looked at me and forced me to look back at the world, until I realized that my voice wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for something true to say. The love I thought had been annihilated was still there. It had just been misplaced. I poured it into Atlas, and in doing so, I funneled it back into myself. The betrayal did not stop hurting, but the silence around it did. I filled that silence with the click of Atlas's nails on the floor, with the sound of my own voice giving him commands, with the murmured conversations with new friends at the dog park, with the firm, clear tone I used with my bookkeeping clients. I learned that sometimes resurrection is not a loud, triumphant blast. It is a quiet series of actions. It is cleaning a wound. It is walking on a damaged leg. It is saying sit and stay and good boy until you remember how to say I am here and I matter. The most profound healing often begins not with a word, but with a whimper in the dark, and the decision to answer it, not with more silence, but with the first, fragile, necessary sound of care. Thanks for listening. If you want to hear more story like this, please like the video and subscribe the channel. Hit the bell icon to get notified.